Hey podcasters, welcome to the Shaun Herr Show, where we learn how to break the slimming cycle by mastering your mind, meals and movement, helping you to finally achieve a balanced lifestyle and long-lasting results. I'm filming this little bit outside today because it is absolutely roasting, so there might be a bit of background noise, some birds and stuff going past. Just go with it, close your eyes, pretend you're here as well. Now in today's episode I'm talking with Steve Opalenik. Me and Steve met a few years back at a calisthenics course over in New York. And so I went into the interview with my little plan thinking that was the main thing we'd talk about. But once we got started, we went straight into Steve's family-run non-profit, the Promethean Project. See, Steve is a mental health counsellor, so our entire conversation was just all about that because I just wanted to know more and more. Honestly, we talked about so much good stuff. We talked about Steve's own overeating disorder he struggled with as a teenager, what it's like for a lot of the teenage boys he works with to start opening up and dealing with emotions, how movement can help control your emotions, mindful breathing for kids, and honestly, just so many awesome little topics. I'm almost certain there'll be at least one or two little nuggets in here that switch on a little light bulb in your head for one of those, oh, moments. Make sure you let me know what those moments are on Facebook or Instagram or drop me an email. So without further ado, let's get into it. Mr. Steve Opalenik. That's how you
Yeah,
pronounce it, isn't
perfect.
it?
Nice.
Yeah. I've been saying it wrong in my head for years until I was listening to your podcast.
Yeah.
Right, cool. So we met a few years ago,
Yeah.
and so I know a little bit about who you are, what you do, because I've been following you on Instagram.
Mhm.
So as with how every podcast gets started, tell everyone listening all about who you are.
All right. So I'm Steve Opalenik. For the first I don't know 12 years of my life, I would only go by Steven, and then I moved to Western Massachusetts, and everyone started calling me Steve, and it was like this weird crisis identity
Okay.
crisis. Because I was like, no, I'm not Steve, I'm Steven. And then I really learned like, oh, I gotta let go of that. And so now I just go by Steve. But my brother calls me Grizzly, which is why my Facebook
Okay.
is Steve Grizzly.
Oh,
Um, so very early on, I was diagnosed with a heart murmur
oh, I
because
didn't know
I had I never really got diagnosed with this, but as a therapist that I am now, I realized I had an emotional overeating disorder. So when I was anxious or depressed, I would go right to food to control that. And it got really bad. I was eating like a whole thing of French bread as a snack, and I
that.
was like dunking it in Thousand Islands dressing, which
Yeah.
was
Right.
delicious, but like really terrible when you
Yeah.
so I got diagnosed with like obesity and a heart murmur in eighth grade.
Okay.
Uh, and the doctors didn't really say anything except, hey, you need to change the way you live. So going through that, nothing changed. I was like, I don't even know what that means. I don't know how I do that. So I continued down that path for a while. And then somewhere, actually, I know exactly where, my brother gave me a gift for one of my birthdays. And it was called combat conditioning. So not convict conditioning, but
Mhm.
combat conditioning.
Right.
And it was by this wrestler. His name was Matt Fury. And it was just the first kind of introduction to calisthenics. I was a wrestler myself, so I knew what it was, but not in training circumstances. And so really through that and exploring with body movement, I really turned my life around. I did a lot of introspection stuff. My brother took me to see the Dalai Lama speak when I was 17, kind of
Wow,
turned
that's
my
cool.
life around on that. So I knew before I graduated high school, I really wanted to work with people on anxiety and depression or even eating. And so I went to this place called UMass Amherst out here, undergrad for psychology. It's a college I went to, and then moved to New Jersey, moved around a little bit, and then decided I really wanted to go back. And I got my master's at Springfield College out here. And really, their motto is mind, body, spirit,
Hmm.
which kind of incorporates what like where I was going with my life, anyways. Um, so it was just happenstance that like I ended up at that college with that message because it's
Yeah.
really become what I'm doing now. So after I graduated that, I became a licensed mental health counselor, and that's what I do now. And then with my brother and sister, we're actually building a nonprofit organization called the Promethean Project, which is all about incorporating mind, body, and spirit in one center. So once we get a space, it's going to be a functioning gym, but we're going to do mental health counseling, addiction recovery, martial arts, nutritional counseling, meditation, and we're going to have practitioners come in to do acupuncture, acupressure, massage, craniosacral stuff like that.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, that's the mission. And then, because it's a nonprofit, half of it's going to be free for people in recovery, and then people with like low income, so they can come and get the services and build a community that's just based on interaction and not based on like values of economics.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, because obviously that's the Promethean Project, the nonprofit. Yeah. That's very, because I've been again trying to kind of figure out exactly what that is through looking at your Instagram and everything, and listening to some of your podcasts and stuff, and I didn't realize, but that sounds basically like exactly what I've been thinking I would want to set up at some point, in terms of having all that stuff under one roof, being able to not just have a gym where I work now, but then have nutrition coaches, counselors, people about mental health to help with whatever you needed, you could go get. And so that's awesome that you're doing that. And obviously you've got the non-profit side, so people who couldn't afford to pay for that can still get it.
Yeah, that's kind of so we recently went through what's called a startup accelerator. So it's like a boot camp for businesses who are just going to be entrepreneurial based. And we were the only nonprofit in it, and we would have to pitch what we were, so like if we went for investments, people would know exactly what it was. So we had 8-minute pitches just to kind of highlight our business model, revenue model, all this stuff. And one of the biggest feedbacks we got from that, when the judges were asking questions, were, why isn't this for profit? And it took me a really long time to figure out how I wanted to word that, because we did a lot of practice pitching, and then at the end of the 5 months, we pitched for prize money. And so in that final pitch, I really solidified what it meant to me. And really the reason why we went the nonprofit route was because we wanted the community to have some ownership over it. We didn't want to be this new idea that's out there just for money, right? We're going to make some money, and that's going to be nice, and we're going to put it back into the community. But we wanted the community to have some ownership over it. And so part of what we're going to do is, once we get up and running, is that we're going to have some of our members actually be on our board for the nonprofit, so that it can generate this intensive community-based approach.
Yeah. So you say once you get up and running, you're going to get to that. So what's the Promethean Project as it is now then?
It's the same thing, but we're using donated space right now. So we don't have like a central hub. We don't have the gym format yet, but we've been working with mental health counseling centers. We actually have an upcoming meeting with a college, so we're hoping to get into college and do some student-based activities for them. We've worked with recovery centers. So my brother teaches Tai Chi and Qigong and Bagua and Xingyi. And so we've done some of those meditative martial arts in recovery centers. I've run some calisthenics programs, some office hours. And then also my sister does yoga and Pilates. So she's run some of that stuff too in those settings. So right now we just kind of hop around. We're hopeful with some of the money we got from the program and some grants we have applications for to get a space pretty soon.
Yeah. Oh, cool. And so once you've got the space, how do you kind of, I guess, get people in? Like, how do you let them know what you're all about and let them know you're there to help? And then, what's that kind of process you'd take them through?
Well, that's one of the reasons we started the podcast, was to get our message out there and kind of create this media buzz, but also have people on that we've connected with who've struggled themselves, and to hear their story. So that's one of the campaigns, is that media campaign through social media and through the podcast. We also have been touching base with local news stations. So we ran a leadership group for youth who struggle with anxiety and depression. So we've been interviewed on a couple local stations because of that. We've been working with like a local senator around here, and he's been really helpful. For once we get the space, he's going to help us get the word out and participate with that too.
Yeah.
And then, right now I counsel private practice. So a lot of my clients want to come over to it because I've been, talking this up for so long.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Just a general grassroots approach at first, and then we'll be working with insurances. And so we'll be in directories for insurances too.
Right. And so your counseling then that you do now?
Yep.
You said earlier that you suffered with anxiety and depression when you were younger.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a lot more talk around all of that. And I think a lot of people kind of don't sometimes grasp quite what it is or what that means, or if it is something that you think you are or might be struggling with, like what are your next steps? So what would your explanation of what those things feel like be, so that someone can then even take the step to start fixing it? Because I guess awareness of it is the first step.
Right. It's a hard question to answer because if someone hasn't really experienced anxiety or depression, it's really hard to try to explain that to someone. But if you can talk about the feelings physically, where the attention is and kind of your frame of mind, you can explain it to people who might be dealing with anxiety and not know it's anxiety or depression. And really, so when I talk about it in session, I like to talk about the physical aspects of these emotions and how they manifest and what some of the symptoms are related to the physical being. And then using that, we can kind of turn it into the emotional conversation. Right? Because to talk about someone, I see a lot of adolescents. So to talk to a 16-year-old, 17-year-old male who comes into my office because his parents force him to come in because they're like, hey, you have some issues, you should talk to someone. Which, again, I don't recommend wording it like that. If you ever have a kid, it's like, hey, you have issues, go talk to someone. The buy-in is never really like, hey, your parents want you to come here to work on something. It's more of, what do you want to work on? And sometimes that starts just with, hey, I want to get a job. And so then we talk about, okay, sorry, hold on, something popped up here. Okay. So that's the segue into the conversation about emotions, about anxiety or depression or anger. Because no one really wants to just dump the first time they come meet someone. And I have like a yoga ball I sit on when I counsel. And I have a lot of tattoos and a big beard. And so people never expect me to be their counselor. I see it in the kids' eyes. And when they come in, the rapport building is so important, right? So I'm kind of dancing around your question, but really it's the easiest way to start talking about emotions with an adolescent male specifically is to talk about how they manifest in the body, because that's one of the things I've seen is a lot of people come in and I have anger issues. My parents tell me I'm mad. And most of the time it's not just that anger. It's also a cover for depression or for anxiety. And so talking about the physical manifestations of these emotions by talking about the nervous system and how anger and anxiety really are pretty much the same nervous system reaction, just different ends of the fight or flight response. It kind of opens up the segue to be like, okay, now that we talked about this and we can all agree if we have a disease in our body, we can talk about that. If I have a heart or if something's wrong with my arm, let's talk about it, let's get it fixed. So if you address it that way, then you can segue into some of the emotional concerns as well. So that's really how I talk about emotions to people. And I do add some personal stories of myself so that they know that anything we're working on, I've experienced before, maybe not to their level, but like it's something I've worked on And I never ask anyone to do something I haven't done myself.
Yeah.
And I let them know that. Your second question about how do you go about making change or finding those things out, again, it's complicated. And I think it really stems from having someone to talk to, right? Find that one person in your tribe or in your people or in your family. It doesn't have to be family, but can be friends or family. And just kind of talk about what you're going through. And usually it will generate this positive conversation, not like to make you happy, but to be able to voice certain things in a positive way. And it can segue into like, okay, what's my next step then? And a lot of times doing this work, it's almost like recommendation based. I get a lot of people who come in because, oh, I heard from my, barber that like you're a good therapist to come to. So just kind of opening up about that, naturally things will come into your life, and then you can find different avenues to find that support.
Do you feel there's kind of like you said, my barber said you're a good therapist.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there's still a kind of stigma around going to see a therapist or going to see a counselor? Like people don't kind of see it the same as what you said before about we all agree if I've got a sore arm, I can talk about the fact that I've got a sore arm. Right. That's quite similar to the way I kind of look at mental health things. It's like people say I've got mental health, but it's like that doesn't make any sense. Everybody has mental health, just the same way we all have physical health as well. It's just sometimes that level of health isn't as ideal as it was a couple of days ago, for example. And so like that thing of we all have physical and mental health. For physical health, you just go see a doctor. But with mental health, do you think or do you find being a counselor, people have a kind of not wanting to go see a counselor the same way they would just go see a doctor if they had something wrong physically?
I definitely see the stigmas. Actually, I have like this sign up in my office that just says that talks about mental health stigma, because I think that's a really important thing to talk about, because it is there. What I'm finding though is that the more we move towards holistic lifestyles, kind of like what you're doing. I listened to your episode, the last episode you did, and talking about like how do you keep these skills that you've built to lose weight? How do you keep the weight up? You keep, these good positive habits. The steps that you did in that exercise really highlighted, okay, like we all have these different sides. So why wasn't this a 10 was one of the things you said. And why wasn't this big buzzword that caused me to come off track? Why wasn't it to this negative extent? But then why wasn't it a 1, 2? So balancing, the physical habits with the emotional habits too was pretty awesome to hear. So I think we are moving a lot towards this holistic approach to things. And so what I've seen is a lot of the younger kids are actually coming to therapy or counseling with more of an open mind. The trouble, what I'm seeing is some of the parents aren't coming with an open mind. Some of the older adults, because it's been so stigmatized in life, aren't coming with the same approach as some of the 6-year-olds that I see. They come in and are like, yeah, cool, whatever, we'll talk about whatever, as long as we can play some cards. I'm like, okay, we can do that. Let's do that. But some of the parents I find are really stuck in this stigma. Nope, it's all my kids' fault. They're here. It's for them. I don't want to even talk to you.
Right. Okay.
Your kid's 12. I need you to talk to me. I can't just go based on your 12-year-old's experience of what happened. I have to balance them out. So a lot of the work we do is not only with the individual, but also the family, so that we can, get a good sense of what's going on, but then help them change some of the approaches to help that kid come out a little bit more and express a little bit more.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Yes, there's definitely a mental health stigma. My hope is that it's with things like what you're doing and what I'm doing, it's going to move towards more of a generalized, like, oh yeah, we all have these ups and downs.
Yeah, it's just a thing.
Go to that person to talk to what's going on.
Yeah. And is that a way that you kind of explain it to people? The idea of a lot of people get this sort of what's the word? Like the sort of thing around labels, where people say once you're given the label of having depression, for example, you sort of take on what you think it means to be depressed. When I think it was a video I saw ages ago from Prince Ear. Have you heard of him on Instagram? No. He does like all kinds of fluffy, nice videos and stuff. Nice. One of the things he said around depression was about, imagine, I think it was like your mind, or you are the sky. And depression, or like a bad day, for example, is one cloud.
Right.
Or a couple of bad days is a really big cloud. And then when it gets to sort of depression, there's just a full sky of cloud and you can't see the blue sky behind it. But you are still there. You are still the blue sky. It's just that the clouds are covering it. And so it's not that you are depressed now. It's that you are feeling depressed, just suffering with depression, and that's the clouds. You're still there.
Right.
I forgot why I got to that, but there's a good thing at the start, and then I segued off.
I think you were talking about how I explained that. And actually, that example is really positive, because what you're doing is externalizing that emotion, and it's not who you are. I'm not depressed. This is how I act when depression takes a hold of me. And there's a whole style of therapy that does that. Narrative therapy is one of my favorite ways to do things, and it externalizes these internal symptoms so we can look at them abstractly and realize, hey, that's not who I am. It's a part of me when it comes up, but that I'm not depression. And so one of the early things in counseling, we have to give diagnoses if we're dealing with insurance. They won't allow them to come back if we don't give them a diagnosis. It's not my favorite thing to do, because I do think it pigeonholes people, like, oh, okay, I have bipolar, so that's who I am now. And so one of the things I do in that first session is talking about, hey, we have to do a diagnosis based on insurance, but I want you to know this is not who you are. And I walk them through the diagnosis so they know what's on paper, so they know what it is. And we always talk about it, which is something I find doesn't always happen with some counselors. They just put it, okay, this person is depressed, so I'm putting this diagnosis down. I always talk about it and talk about the symptoms and make sure, the family's like, yeah, no, that's actually what's going on. And then we externalize it, like, okay, you have this depressed, major depressive disorder that's moderate without psychotic symptoms, but this is what this means. Let's externalize it. Let's talk about it. And, I've even created some sessions with a kid who was really into fantasy, like Dungeons and Dragons. And we created a campaign where his anxiety and depression were the boss monsters in the campaign.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, we had to change the way we approached it, because I don't want him rolling dice against depression, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man, depression beat me up. So we changed the way we approached it. But I think that's an important philosophy to bring in, is like, you aren't your symptoms. You are this other person who likes Dungeons and Dragons and likes fantasy and likes to create these worlds and likes to write. That's who we're working with. We're not working with the depression. So we do a lot of positive psychology and solution-focused psychology.
Yeah. You mentioned there you have to give these diagnoses for insurance.
Yeah.
So when I was listening to your episode with Hermione the other day, you were talking about some of the things like that of you both having to do it. And I think more just for clarity for people listening in the UK, so people who are more likely to listen for me, is that kind of related to how your like medical system works? Like, to be able to get the treatment, people have to show their insurance that there's a problem or something, is it? Because obviously over here that'd be different.
Right. It's not exactly like that. And actually, one of the ways I bisect that is just to give a generalized diagnosis of adjustment disorder, which is in the literature, just it's a period of 6 months where something's changed and you're having trouble adjusting to it.
Okay.
So, after 6 months, you're supposed to update it to like a more specific diagnosis, but you don't necessarily have to you have a time frame. It's more just so they can track what's being worked on, because insurance doesn't necessarily want to come in and pay for someone to come for 12 sessions if it's an adjustment disorder. It's a weird flawed system that you need to show, hey, this is my disease, or this is what's going on for me to get treatment, instead of saying, hey, why don't we come in and just kind of work on the symptoms. But there are ways around it too, by making really generalized diagnoses, like depressive disorder not known, right? Or anxiety, which is just a fancy way of, hey, you're dealing with some anxiety. But yeah, some of the insurance-based stuff is really tricky when you deal with that.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, like, what that meant, like the insurance and stuff.
Yeah.
If it was just like how the medical system and medical insurance and all that works over for you guys. Because over here, I think that might be different, because we have the NHS and all that. So you just go see a doctor, and then they tell you to go see a counsellor, but then you're just on a waiting list for however long, and I think it kind of works differently.
Yeah, it sounds like yours sounds way more awesome.
It sounds it in a lot of ways, but from what I know, at least, it can take a long time from being on a waiting list in the UK to actually get seen. And then because there's not enough kind of resources, and because it is kind of a contained system, somebody couldn't just go. I don't think it'd be as easy to just go and find somebody like you and like the Promethean Project that could help, but then would also be covered that you wouldn't necessarily have to pay for in the same way. So it's kind of like, kind of like you said before, it's like a double-edged sword. It's got this benefit, but it's not as versatile in a way to get help if you need it.
To be fair too, my wait list is about like 1 to 2 months depending on my availability. So it kind of goes both ways. But one of the things I really want to institute in the Promethean Project is just these office hours. So that way you can come in and kind of meet with a person, like first come, first serve, just to get in the door and see if it's a really good fit. You would still go through insurance or whatever for payment, but it's a good way to come in and see a therapist and then say, okay, I think this person's going to be a good fit. I don't mind waiting a month to get in on a regular basis. Or, there are studies that show that even just coming in for the first session can be really therapeutic for a person, because they just get to dump a lot of stuff, and then they can go upon their life and not have to come back right away. So it's a lot of interesting philosophies on how we can go about doing this stuff.
Yeah. And earlier on, you mentioned your brother does all kinds of Tai Chi, Qigong, your sister does yoga, you do calisthenics things with people in workshops and stuff.
Yeah.
And is that, like you said about how you talk about the physical parts of anxiety, depression, is that kind of a first step for people to, I guess, relax or learn to control their body more, which then helps to understand the way their mind or the spirit is working in the other two elements of things?
I don't know if it's a first step, but it's a first step. It really depends on the client. One of the episodes I did was with Grace Cavadlo, and we really talked about just why yoga is so therapeutic. And I think actually your episode with Becca, you guys talked about that as well. And from a therapeutic standpoint, if I could get someone to do yoga for their anxiety, I'd much rather have them practice that than come in each week. I'd rather have them do yoga continuously and come in monthly just to do check-ins and work on some of the skills that we're working on, because yoga is really good for balancing your nervous system. And it's really good balance of, relaxation, the parasympathetic relaxation, and the sympathetic of, doing exercise. And it can balance those things really well, and your blood pressure really well. But then at the same time, you're present, you're mindful, you're free of distraction, you're sober from distraction. And so just sitting in that space is controlling anxiety, and it can manifest in different ways throughout the rest of your life. So, I do think movement's super important, because so much of the mind-body affects each other. That connection between the mind and body is so prevalent. So it really depends on where people are. Sometimes people just need to come in and vent, and then you can work on the physical piece as well. And sometimes people just need to move. And I think there is a beauty in being able to figure out which one works the best, and then work, peppering the other things in so that it continues to be a positive thing for them, rather than a chore of going to the gym or a chore of going to a therapist.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of stuff, if you look at the literature on martial arts or Kundalini yoga or just yoga in general, is when you start to move in different ways, you create more neuroplasticity in your brain and more neural pathways, and you start to actually think differently. And it can be really helpful if you're stuck in a pattern or if you're stuck in a rut, to start to move, to change the way you think.
Yeah. That's a big thing, like that Tony Robbins talks about. And you just sprung to mind there. So the kind of, it's not an affirmation, it's like I think he just calls it your move. See, I guess it's like anchoring in terms of NLP and stuff. So if you're sat down feeling slobby, and then you just get up and do some squats, all of a sudden you feel energetic.
Yeah.
So I guess like you were saying there, like just by moving, just making that happen, because of how that affects suddenly all of like your blood flow and your blood pressure and the hormones flowing around and stuff. All of a sudden, just by moving, you feel and therefore are thinking differently. And so I guess it's that kind of like an instant response, as well as more long term with all the sort of neuroplasticity you were just saying there.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it too, there's a couple other things. You're making a decision to actually do something, and that's going to create this motivation. And, I think everyone thinks motivation is fairy dust, that we just sprinkle it on and like, oh, I can go run now.
Yeah.
Because that's the biggest excuse. Oh, if I was motivated, I would go to therapy. If I was motivated, I'd go to the gym. But you actually have to have a firm decision to do that. And that's where motivation is bred, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's happening. That motivation is kind of coming from that decision. And I think you're also shifting some emotional states when you do that. Because if you look at an emotion, it's kind of comprised of three big things. The physical attributes of what go into that emotion, where your attention is at that emotion, like is it positive or negative? Are you focused on what someone did to you? Or are you focused on what you did? And then the behaviors and the language that we use when we're in that emotion. Those three things comprise, and there's a bunch of other stuff, but they comprise what an emotion is. And if we get stuck, it's hard to go from sad to happy, right? If you look at that, how am I going to go from this emotion to this emotion? It's overwhelming because you don't know. But if you can if you can break down the emotions into these smaller segments, you can start making micro shifts into those, and eventually that will lead to a different emotion. So if I was angry, right, one of the biggest things I'm focused on is tension in my body when I'm angry, right? Clutching my fists. But if I notice that's my pattern, that's my physical attribute when I'm angry, and I notice it, then I can work on relaxing that. And now it's not going to make me calm right away, but it's going to take some of the load off of the anger, so I can then begin to shift. And then if I can change my attention through affirmations or just looking at the positive, then I can shift even more. So I think it's really, the movement's great for that, because you're shifting what's going, you're telling your body, hey, we're not at this state, we're actually at this state, by making it move and do something different.
Yeah. And that's something I often explain to people just in terms of breathing. And again, coming back to yoga, that's why so much of yoga is focused on breath. Because again, like we've kept talking about in different sort of moments so far, it's all about the nervous system.
Yeah.
So if you're breathing fast up in your chest, then that means you're in fight or flight mode. Everything's up and peaked and everything's tense and you feel stressed, the adrenaline's getting released. And so like you said there, if you relax that, if you change the breath to a more belly focused diaphragm breath, that's where you breathe when you're not stressed, when everything's more chilled. And so your body responds by relaxing everything else as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things I say when you're talking about like diaphragmatic breathing into your diaphragm, where your belly kind of moves, is if you can relate to someone who's had a baby around, whether they've had a baby or a baby brother or sister or a cousin that they've seen sleeping. And if you watch a baby sleep, they naturally go into diaphragmatic breathing. Their stomach raises because they're calm and they're resting. And I think exactly what you said is the nervous system and breath are so important that throughout the course of the day, we shift between sympathetic and parasympathetic in our nervous systems. So that's why sometimes the 3 p.m. slump, where you're like, oh, I'm at work, I'm so tired. Naturally, that's a parasympathetic reaction. It's like, oh, let's rest.
Okay.
One of the ways you can do it is through breath control. Is if you start to breathe faster and use that almost a lot of times, don't breathe fast, but you can use it for good. By breathing a little bit faster, you can switch to sympathetic and you'll have more energy. Right? That's a life hack. But also, if you ever seen people lift heavy weights, right? They don't go up to the bar and they're like, right? Because they're not going to generate that power they need. It's more of a, and yoga does a lot of different breaths like that to access the different things. But it is really interesting. The inhale usually is tied to sympathetic nervous system, and the exhale is usually the parasympathetic relaxing. So you can play even around with like, okay, I do have to inhale, I can't cut that out completely, but I'm gonna make it a little bit shorter and really focus on the exhale to engage my parasympathetic.
It's really interesting, that bit, actually, because I was speaking to a counsellor in my old gym like a couple of years ago now, maybe, and she was saying when somebody is having an anxiety attack, like a panic attack, and they're hyperventilating, what's actually happening is, people say, oh, just breathe. They're already breathing.
Yeah.
But she said what's happening is they're just breathing in. So they just, and that's where the panic is. And she said, what you want to try and get someone to do is to take a big breath out and release it all. And so what you said there with the in breath being the, like you say, that kind of more stressful, if you like, breath, and then the breathe out being the relaxed one, like that makes total sense. If you're having an anxiety attack and you're just breathing in, you're going to feel anxious, whereas as soon as you breathe out, you'll feel more relaxed straight away. It's a really cool thing I just thought of there.
No, I mean, I think it's we could have hours of conversation on breath and mind body stuff. It's so pertinent. And actually, there's a really good book out if anyone is dealing with kids who have anxiety or, toddlers who have tantrums a lot. It's called Alpha Breaths. And this guy, Alpha Breath.
Alpha Breath. Okay.
Yeah, it's like it's an ABC book, but each letter is a different mindfulness breath technique.
Okay.
So it's a really good, I got it for my daughter, but also for my practice, because it's a really fun way to talk about breath without saying, hey, you're anxious, breathe out slowly instead of fast in.
There
are things like A is for the alligator breath. And so when you breathe in, you take this huge like jaw. So you breathe in like that. And when you breathe out, it closes its jaw. Or there's one that's about hot chocolate breath, where you breathe in to smell, you hold it like you're holding a hot chocolate. You breathe in to smell the chocolate, and then you breathe out to cool it off. And so it's kind of a cool shift for younger kids.
So
you don't have to get into the weeds about, well, this is what's going on in your body. You can just talk about the breath and then build later when they can understand it a little bit more.
I'll try and find that on Amazon and put it in the description or the show notes, whatever it's called for the.
Yeah, it's by Dr. Christopher Willard, who we might actually have on our podcast at some point.
Okay, cool.
Talk about it, because I got to see him speak in Boston, and just a really good guy.
Yeah. Okay, talking to your podcast then, or like shift into that a little bit. So your podcast is called Break the Chains, Find Your Flame.
Yes.
Sick name. By the way,
thanks.
Really good name. So you said that's kind of a way to spread the message or the awareness of the practice, the nonprofit, get people in, stuff like that. And you say on the podcast that you want to have people on it who have broken the chains and found their flame to kind of show others how to do that.
Yeah.
And I have something written down here that I wanted to ask. Yeah, so I guess obviously people should go listen to it 100% because there's some awesome episodes.
Thank you.
But if somebody wants to break the chains, find their flame, I guess first thing, what does that actually mean, like for you, for someone to find that?
So let me talk a little bit about the name and where it comes from. So the Promethean Project, why we're called the Promethean Project, it's based on the myth of Prometheus in Greek mythology. He was a titan who gave the gift of fire to humans so that they could survive. Right. The idea behind that is not for us to think we're titans or gods or anything like that, but really the idea is to help people find their own flame, their own fire, which is their own potential. So we came up with the name the Promethean Project, one, because I thought it sounded really cool, and I've always loved that myth. We don't have to talk about the second part where he was tortured. But two, because this idea of manifesting your own potential and really finding that yourself and breaking away from like the societal chains that hold us back from doing that is something that comes up all the time for me, whether it's working on a muscle up or working on, managing anxiety, or even just being prepared for a presentation, or, trying something new. I think all these things were held back by either societal chains or our own mental chains that say, no, I can never do that. So I'm not even going to try. It's dysfunctional thinking when you think like that. It's like, oh, this is going to happen anyway, so why should I try? And so, the Promethean Project came along when we were talking about the podcast. We played around with like word play on that. Flint and steel was one of them, to kind of create your own flame. But really, I thought the tagline, break the chains, find your flame, was something that resonated more with me. And so the idea of breaking free from these things, and then not just, the guests we have on are still on that journey, right? I don't think they're completely all set and they've reached nirvana or whatever. But they've taken steps to break away from some of those chains, those mental constructs, and to find their own potential. And that could be just for now what that potential is, or it could be steps towards 20 years down the line, what their potential actually means. And so it's a really cool message. And plus, I'm a huge literary geek that I like wordplay a lot. So that's where it came from. So for me, it was really realizing, okay, I'm eating to manage my emotions, right? And I like food. I'm like Jack Black like that. I love eating food, right? But it was unhealthy for me. And so I'd get stuck in these mental constructs and societal constructs of, I'll never be fit. I'll never have control of these anxieties. I'm just going to go with it, and I'm going to choose my control over what I eat. Even though it made me feel like shit after, I still have control for that moment. I'm choosing to eat the French bread. So that took me a lot of work to break through, because it was just so ingrained in my brain. And then when I realized that actually the control comes from not doing that, to really sit with my emotions, honor them, and then they become gifts, I'm actually now working on finding my potential more, because I can sit and be bored or be uncomfortable, but then also start making progress towards where I want to be.
Yeah. I wanted to follow that up with, do you get this on your podcast where you think of something and you're like, oh, that'd be really good, and then the moment comes and you're like, oh no, and then you're thinking, should I just edit the pause? Just keep it in so people know we fucked up as well.
Yeah, I do a little bit of both. There's actually a couple early episodes I kept some stuff in when I was interviewing my brother and my sister. One, because I thought it was more real, and it showed like, hey, everyone messes up. This isn't going to be completely seamless. This is real. This is real life. And then two, so I can make fun of my brother and my sister when they messed up.
Yeah. Right,
but
I've
it
totally
happened
forgot
quite a bit.
the other thing anyway. It's gone now. So what I will ask is, again, it links back to something from before, but kind of what you just said as well. Thinking of your emotions as gifts. I can't remember quite what you said earlier, but you put something on your Instagram a couple of days ago, might have even been yesterday. Days are really long. I forget which one's which.
I think it was yesterday.
Yeah, and it was sort of like a table of emotion, and if you express it, this is what happens.
Yeah.
And if you suppress it, this is what happens, or this is kind of what it leads to or manifests as.
Yeah.
And so I think the point, well, the word that you used of emotions being a gift, I think is a really good one to make, because that's something I talk about from time to time in terms of stress. Like, stress isn't a bad thing, it's just a thing. Same as, again, coming back to that idea of physical health, go see a doctor, mental health, go see a counselor, no big deal. If you've got pain in your arm, that's just your body saying, maybe slow down using that arm for a minute because there's something not quite right. Emotion is just the same. It's your brain saying something's not quite right. Let's deal with it. And so that table of this is the emotion, this is what it leads to if you do the right thing with it, or the productive thing. This is what happens if you don't do anything productive with it. What are some of the kind of standout or the common ones that people might, I guess, relate to from that table that you think of?
I think really it's when you think about it, anxiety is a big one, right? Because we always see that anxiety or stress are some of the big ones, because one of the things that we always hear is like, oh, I'm so stressed out. And like you were saying, what are your buzzwords? How do they lead you astray? And so stressed out's a big one.
Yeah.
Or even, this is a side note, but even, hey, how are you today? Oh, I'm tired. It's like, by saying that, it's not really what you are, it's just you're dealing with it, but it also gives you the go ahead to be like, okay, if I identify as tired, now anything I do after I can blame on being tired instead of actually owning what I'm doing.
Okay.
And so that was just a side note, because I do that a lot. I catch myself saying, oh, I'm tired, and I'm like, oh, I am tired, but that's not actually how I am. Anxiety is a big one because it stops us so much. Oh, I'm anxious about presenting, or I'm anxious about going to the soccer game, or I'm anxious about school, and we hide behind that a lot of times if we don't honor what that is. But if you are able to honor what the gift of anxiety is, it's really a motivating state, right? Anxiety is our body saying, hey, something's happening that we need to stay mobile, right? And back in the day was anxiety would be, hey, there's a saber-tooth tiger, run away, right? So it's telling you, like you're saying, there's something going on and we have to be ready to react.
Yeah.
Nowadays, hopefully we're not chased by tigers, but now those catalysts, those stimulants that kind of bring us into that state are things like a job or a relationship or school, or these things create anxiety or stress. And so we can use that to actually motivate us if we honor, hey, I'm actually anxious. What am I anxious about? What is it about school that is making me anxious? Okay, I have a test today, right? So if I misconstrue why I'm anxious and try to run away or avoid that, it's going to make it harder for me to go to school the next day because I know I have to make up the test. This was a big one. When there's something for me, when there was something I didn't want to do in school, I'd be sick all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
But then the next day would just be harder to motivate myself to do it. But if you can honor, okay, yes, I'm anxious about school because of this test, and this test is making me nervous because it's important for me to do well. You can then use that to be like, okay, that's going to motivate me to study more, or feel confident enough to put the effort in and show up and try to do as best as I can, rather than avoiding it or procrastinating and studying because I don't want to do it because I'm nervous I'm going to fail.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest one that I see. And then you have other things. I just pulled it up real quick. You have other things like guilt, right? And that is another thing we often talk about is, I made this decision and it was for me, but it put someone else either in harm's way or it made them feel bad. I feel really guilty. Sometimes I catch myself feeling guilty about stuff that happened like 5th grade. Like, why did I do that? Right. And if you do that, it just carries it kind of sits with you and it immobilizes you sometimes. Like, I'm a terrible person, or I got to stay away from people because I made this decision. I'm kind of, but if you look at it and you're like, yeah, I feel guilty about this. Why do I? Because I hurt this person's feeling. So what can I do to make amends? All right, so now I'm taking this step and I'm bettering myself because I'm listening to my emotion and I'm honoring it and I'm doing what it needs me to do. So I'm going to go make amends, or I'm going to kind of add value to my life because I'm taking this step.
Yeah.
Right? And I always tell people in counseling that there's no statute of limitation on making amends. We think if we get in a fight last week, now it's a week later, we can't apologize for that. Well, that's bullshit. You can always go back, and you may find out like, I didn't even realize that. It's not that big of a deal. But taking that step is honoring it and kind of using the emotion for what it's needed, and not like sitting with it and not doing anything.
Yeah, I really like that. I haven't finished the rest of the podcast episode of yours, where you're talking about positive thinking and flipping situations and stuff.
Yep.
But that sounds a lot like what that, I guess, was going to get into that I haven't listened to yet, of feeling a negative emotion, well, what we call a negative emotion, and realizing that actually it's just a signal of something you feel bad about. How can you use that to not make that same mistake again, basically? Again, for the example of guilt that you gave there, it's like, any emotion you can just, rather than feeling it and thinking, oh my God, I'm guilty about this, oh my God, I'm sad about this, I'm angry about this, I'm upset about that. A lot of people kind of feel like or claim that they overthink things, and that's a problem. Whereas Tim Ferriss, in one of his TED Talks, said actually most of us don't think enough into it. We get to that point, but then if we actually keep thinking about it and dig a bit deeper into it, like you just did there in those examples, you can actually get a benefit from it. People just stop thinking too soon at the point where it feels bad.
Because it's too hard to hold. It's like, this makes me feel bad. I don't want to do this. But we all need to be able to be bored or to sit with an emotion. So big buzzword, I heard you say that in one of your episodes, is mindfulness, right? We hear it all the time. And I actually like referring to it as sobriety from distraction. But it's the same thing. I just like to get fancy with words. But it's a huge buzzword. You hear it in physical health. You hear it in mental health all the time. You just got to be mindful, do things mindfully. And I think the misconception with that is every time we talk about it, mindfully eat, or mindfully be present with your friends, or pay attention to what's going on. And we always think of the fun things. Okay, I'm going to be with my friends at dinner. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm going to pay attention to what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's hard, but it's way easier than being mindful when it's hurtful, or when it's boring, or when it's stuff you don't want to do. And so my biggest thing lately is I've been practicing mindfulness when I'm doing the dishes, right? Because in the past I've hated it. My wife and I used to argue about it all the time. But now I find myself doing it more and more because it's so simple. And if I'm mindful while I'm doing the dishes, it goes by like that. Rather than saying, I'll do them later, and then it's 10 o'clock at night going to bed. We got to start the dishwasher, and then I'm doing dishes, And so I think that's an important thing to notice when we talk about emotions or just talk about states of being bored, is that we have to sit through them. Because if we distract ourselves, like, we're never going to deal with those things, and they'll always stay within us and manifest in really shitty ways.
Yeah, I like that kind of way of looking at it. Definitely. Like, I've actually never thought of mindfulness in that way.
Yeah.
In terms of, like you said, we always talk about it on the fun side, the happy side, And again, like if you were to say be mindful in things, the first things I think of would be when you're eating, when you're again eating, but with your family, put your phone down, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it definitely also does apply to the stuff that isn't as nice. Like you've got to be mindful of that as well. Like why is it not nice? And again, just dig into it and understand it more.
You know what's really interesting about that too, we can even break it down to a simple physical reaction too, is we have different taste buds, right? But the ones we use a lot are the salty and the sweet.
Yeah.
And we like those, right? I personally don't like them together, but some people really like them together. I get flack for it all the time. Oh, you don't like chocolate covered pretzels? I'm like, no, I don't like that stuff. But so those we use all the time, but we have different taste buds and we don't utilize them a lot. That bitterness that we have. Well, we stay away from the bitterness because we don't like that taste.
Yeah.
Some people do, but a lot of people don't like it. But there's a reason why we have it. We need those nutrients that come from things that are naturally tasting like that. And so that's kind of like what I was thinking of when I was talking about mindfulness is we have to be mindful because in those moments that aren't as fun to be mindful in, it's really important for us. There's a reason why we have to do it, just like there's a reason why we have to eat bitter things because those are different nutrients that we need.
Yeah, something that you mentioned earlier when you were talking about people just saying like, how are you? And then somebody says, oh, I'm tired, was something that made me think of that kind of easy response, and I kind of want to know what your opinion is on it. I can't remember where I heard it ages ago now, but the example they gave was, when somebody asks, how are you doing today? And you just say, I'm okay. And it's basically the point that whatever it was that I was reading, listening to was making was that nobody is okay. Like that's not a thing. It's not a good answer. It's not good for conversation. It's just useless anyway. But like you said, even saying I'm tired is more descriptive or more useful, both to conversation and to you, than just saying I'm okay. But what this thing I was reading, I'm just going to say reading for the sake of it, reading was saying was you're basically lying to the other person and to yourself. So if you're feeling, say, stressed about something, if you just say, I'm okay, you kind of, like we were talking about before with that thing you posted, that's you suppressing the feeling of being stressed. You're trying to pretend it's not there. So when people do that, would you say it's better for somebody to say, actually, I'm feeling a bit stressed right now, and just express that, even if you don't go into it? Would you say it's better to express, what, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling a little bit sad, I'm feeling really happy, if it might be that, because it actually lets you express that emotion, even if you're not digging into it?
Right. For the most part, I say, yeah. I get a lot of people who come into therapy. I'm like, hey, how's the week been? I'm like, oh, it's been fine. I'm like, okay, now tell me what fine means, because it's not
another one. Yeah.
At all. And sometimes I'll mess with kids and we're like, okay, well, I'll see you later because our job's done that.
Yeah.
And they're like, what do you mean? And then we get into the conversation. I do think to be honest with yourself, it's important to answer those questions honestly. Now, I don't want to take away from the fact that sometimes it's unsafe to do that, depending on who you're talking to or that you're in. So I'd say in those extreme cases where it's unsafe to do that, or you could be taken advantage of by being emotional and you won't be able to control it, I think it's important to say what you need to say and then leave that situation and then process those emotions appropriately in a safe space and in a safe way.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Making sure it's relevant, I guess, to who you're talking to.
Right.
If it's like someone you've met twice, and you suddenly say, "Oh, how you doing? Do you know what? I'm feeling quite depressed today." This 2-day person is going to be like, "What?" And then that's not going to go so well. But again, something I just thought of there when you said, if be sort of, I guess, careful who you're talking to with it, because it may be the case that they could then take advantage of you being emotional.
Right.
Way back at the start of this, like nearly an hour ago, I've just checked how long we've been talking. You were saying that you were talking about basically adolescent males coming in and getting them into talking about emotion and stuff, and kind of connecting those two dots. A lot of men, guys, whatever you want to call us, worry about being emotional because we see it as this kind of weakness.
Right.
So what is your kind of thoughts, or like what would you kind of say to people who are scared to be emotional? Because like there's still a lot now that I hear of in terms of, say for example, I've got a friend who had an ex-boyfriend who came out of the military and stuff, and he was so terrified to be emotional because that's drilled out of you.
Yeah.
And yet he's almost like every other week got friends that are committing suicide and stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously it's like a really deep topic because do you express it and then you open yourself to it again, or do you keep it suppressed but then it never gets dealt with? So I guess for men more so, this kind of mental health opening up is a big thing. So I guess that like what are your kind of thoughts and around that?
So not open. So there's a couple things. People not showing emotions because that's what society says to do. I like the challenge and say, well, that's easy. It's easy to do that, but to be this concept of being a real man, right? Which I don't necessarily believe in, but sometimes you talk about it because that's why they're listening to societal norms.
Yeah.
Is really to take ownership of yourself, right? And so to do that, you have to take ownership of yourself. So if you, a 15-year-old kid who wants to be a man, instead of perpetrating like you're really tough and you're going to kick someone's ass, to be a real man, you got to own your emotions, and that's trickier than suppressing them.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one way I talk about it. If that's it, the ex-boyfriend or the boyfriend that you talked about, that's a little bit trickier, right? A little bit deeper of a conversation. And when we talk about that, it's like, okay, do you want to just get by or do you want to heal?
Yeah.
Because one is getting you by barely, and the other is more of a healing activity to do. It's not an easy activity by any means. But it's definitely how you start to heal is moving towards owning those emotions and working through them.
Yeah. I really like that about what you said about like if you want to be a real man, you kind of typically see like if I'm going to be more manly, I'm going to do the more challenging thing.
Right.
In a way, like say for example, if you're in the gym and you and your mate are doing bicep curls, you want to do one more bicep curl than your mate because it's hard.
Yeah.
So you look more manly. And if you take it from that principle, if you want to do the harder thing, then that is to be emotional because it's hard.
It's like a Jedi mind trick, right? It's like, oh, you want to one up everyone. This is what the hard stuff is. You got to practice this, and they're like, oh, what? And you kind of lead them in by kind of engaging where they're at.
Yeah.
Hey, can we take a small break? I gotta go pee really bad.
Yeah. Like you need to go soon anyway, don't you? So if you want to like start wrapping up, or
yeah, let me go pee real quick.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I'm gonna pee myself.
All right. Okay. Cool. So if we do cut this bit out, cool. If not,
you guys get to wait while I go pee. So
yeah, we might cut that bit out, and just come back so it's like a really quick piss. But yeah, if we just carry it on, I think we finished talking about the Jedi mind trick of sort of reverse psychology in people into allowing themselves to be emotional. And so I think going from the Jedi mind trick bit, that would be a good way to shift off towards the end.
Nice.
Because at the end of every one of your podcasts, you do this cool thing that I thought every time I listen to it, I think, I wonder what mine would be.
Right.
And so I was thinking, I wonder if any of Steve's listeners know what his answers would be. And so what it is, well, I'll basically just go through the questions. So
sure. Yeah.
If any of your podcast listeners want to know what your answers would be, make sure you send them over. So, first question to round off. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
All right, so I've given this a lot of thought, and that was a great segue. Like the Jedi mind trick into superpower is awesome. There are two, depending on my mood, that I usually tell people. The first one is to control molecules, right?
Okay.
Because if you could do that, you could actually, it's kind of a hack. You could actually have multiple
power. Yeah, I guess.
Like, oh, I could walk through that wall, or I could fly, or I could, shoot concussive beams from my eyes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a hack. The second one is also a hack, because given that we're talking about superpowers, you have to assume that if we're in a world where superpowers exist, nothing's impossible, right? Okay. So if you take that into account, I would like to control probability, because if nothing's impossible, there's just a high % chance that I can't fly. I'll be that 1 in 10 billion that could fly. So right. I could control probability to give myself other superpowers. So it's kind of like a hack when you think about it. It's like, okay, I've spent some time. There's so many cool things out there. Most people say flying or invisibility or something like that, which all makes sense. But it's my way of kind of being greedy, being a huge geek. I'm like, no, I want more than just one.
Yeah.
So these are my hacks to do it.
Okay, nice cheating way of doing it there.
I don't think I would want to read people's minds, because I think that would just be terrible.
Yeah.
Especially in my job, I would be like, it might be helpful, but then I'd always get like the deeper stuff, and I'm like, I get too much anyway. So.
Yeah. Okay, nice little hack there, and then. Yeah. The other one, which I think is often even more interesting,
right.
And again, more of a prompt for you if you're listening, is what do you believe are your superpowers right now?
So I do this question because it puts people on the spot, and I like it when things get awkward. I don't like it coming back towards me. I would say my ability to listen is probably one of my superpowers, and to sit with people in uncomfortable situations.
Mm-hmm.
Those two things I think I do pretty well. It doesn't come easy to me. There are times in counseling or with my family or friends where I feel like, okay, this is really uncomfortable to sit here with this silence, but I'm able to work through that so that what needs to come out can come out. Because if you're constantly filling that silence and not listening and just like, I got to do something or else I'm terrible at this, you miss a lot, and you shut other people down from experiencing that and coming to their own realizations of things. So I'd say probably being able to sit with people in silence and being uncomfortable, but then also being able to listen.
Yeah. Nice. It
depends on who you ask, though, because if you ask my wife, she may not agree with the listening part.
Yeah. We'll take it. We'll take your wife out of the poll for the sake of the answer. Okay, nice, man. Well, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Enjoyable. We'll have to turn it around and have you come on too.
Yeah, defo. And the other thing is I wanted to do to round off, to wrap it all up, I thought would be if you give that little quote that you end yours with, because then my listeners get to listen to that because it's awesome.
Yeah. I kind of stole it from a fantasy book I was reading, but I thought it was so pertinent. So usually, and I, depending on how I say it changes, but the main concept is the most important step in anything, but also in health and wellness, is always the next step. So that's how I end our podcast.
Yeah, like it, man. So because most people get it the wrong way around.
Yeah.
Something you said in Hermione's podcast was people always focus on the first step.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first step is just the next step in what you're already doing.
Exactly. So again, it's a hack. I like these hacks.
Yeah.
Every step is important on the journey, and
Yeah.
it only changes where you're at on that journey. So it's always the next step that's the important. Keep going, keep moving.
Yeah. So in case anyone didn't quite hear it the first time, we'll just reiterate it. The most important step is the next one.
Yes.
Nice.
I told you it was going to be an awesome listen. And that quote at the end, oh, so good. And what did you think? Did you get any of those light bulb moments where that penny finally drops, something finally clicks, and you just get it? If you did, let me know what they were, because I would love to hear about them. Drop me a message on Facebook or Instagram, send me an email, or leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube. Before you go, I just want to say thanks for listening. It honestly does mean a lot, because you could have done anything with the last half hour of your life, but you chose to spend it with me and Steve, and that's just amazing. If you enjoy the podcast and fancy doing me a little favor, it will be a massive help if you could leave a review on iTunes. That way more people are likely to discover the podcast and get some of their own penny drop light bulb moments. Oh, and make sure you subscribe too, so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, make sure you like the video, like my page, and subscribe to my channel as well. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.